So firstly, thank you for coming this afternoon. My name's Mick, Cory. I'm Secretary General and Executive Director of Geographics. And I'll outline a little bit first who we are, and then I'll explain a little bit what we're going to do and how we're going to go about it. The first thing to say is that we're going to use a bit of technology called Slido. And so if Carol can switch the Slido over, if you go to slido.com and put the hashtag EG-Inspire in there, you have the ability to answer some questions. We've got a poll that we're going to run, but also you can enter your questions. And if you like somebody else's question, you can vote for it, and it goes up the ranks. And at the end, when we have a discussion, we'll be able to open that up to the floor. We'll use the Slido technology as well as conventional technology, analog questions and answers. So here we have one poll. So if you are logging in now, you'll see that we have a question there. Do you agree that European Commission should use authoritative data for pan-European decision making? It's a simple yes and no. And as people answer that question, we'll see that yes, you'll see that the votes go up. One person has said yes, so it's 100%. But as more and more answer this, that we'll find that we'll have a look at that at the end anyway. Okay, Geographics, Dominique introduced us very briefly, and we're a membership association of national mapping, cadastral and land registries across the whole of Geographic Europe. Some of you may be familiar with us, but those of you who are not, we're basically a membership association of national government bodies responsible for geodetic surveying, topographic mapping, cadastral mapping, and land registration mapping. We've got 63 members. We're not just about the European Union. We extend right across the whole of Geographic Europe, so 46 countries. And we think we cover about 90% of those bodies, those official bodies that have responsibility for these activities. We have 8 knowledge exchange networks, and the Inspire knowledge exchange network is one of those. And really, it's one of our 3 core functions. One, knowledge exchange, representation, and the third one is about making access to our members' data and facilitating that. And so it's in that context that we've been doing 3 projects over the last number of years. So I'm going to introduce each of those projects, and then later on I shall come back and talk a bit about the strategic lessons. But between me and my second presentation, our experts from our members will talk a little bit about some of the practical lessons learned from participation in these projects. And we think this is quite important that we make this experience known to the wider community. Inspire is at quite a critical point now, and informing the way forward on Inspire from practical experience is a key thing that we think we can help with that wider public good activity. So the first project was the European Location Framework project. It's a 44-month project co-funded by the ICT PSP programme by the European Commission, 50% funding. There were 40 partners in this. This was quite a large project, and those partners came from public, private and academic organisations. These partners included more than 20 national mapping cadastral agencies and spanning over 20 countries as well. And the project itself was managed by NLS Finland and then coordinated by Statens Kartverk from Norway. It ran and concluded its core activities in October 2016, and there followed then a 2-year transition stage up until last October. During that project, we had over 20 data providers providing thematic content from Inspire at different levels of maturity, at different levels of resolution. And actually, you can see from the green colours the number of data providers and content that was there. You'll see a little bit more detail later on. But we also have content at lower resolutions for all of the coloured areas on that map. So those blue areas show where we have 1 to 250,000 scale resolution data available through Geographic's pan-European data sets. The content for the project, the green areas, was built on Inspire services. And the basic architecture was built on cascaded services, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, I suspect. So what happened? What's happened to that project? So we created some test services from December 2016, and we offered that actually to a number of commission bodies in particular, and indeed including Eurostat and European Environment Agency. And one of the key things we found was the importance of sustainable funding, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. We also approached a number of private sector companies for a partnership to do this, but we had limited success here, and there was a lot of reasons for that. And so we learned a lot from the experience, but actually the take-up was somewhat disappointing, and that's something that I think, in terms of informing the way future, we want to cover. But a second project then kicked off, looking at those services, but focusing on open data, and unsurprisingly, that was called Open European Location Services. 10 partners participated in that project, again from across Europe, and this again was a 2-year project duration. We have a website, which if you're interested in looking at what was achieved there, openels.eu, it actually got quite a lot of information available for those of you who wish to delve in a little bit more. And we are at the point now of thinking about how we take that forward, because with Open PSI directive, there's actually quite a lot of potential here. That Open ELS built on the ELF project and achieved most, if not all, of its deliverables. We actually, in the project, define what we mean by open data services at a European level. So, for example, we developed a policy, a licensing framework that works at the European level. We also developed a case study, a toolkit for national mapping cadastral agencies, the steps they have to go through to try to get their data open. And of course, that information that was already open, we made available through the user interface. But importantly, it was focused on user need. So we had a structured approach to identifying what the significant users wanted from open data. And we gained much greater understanding of the complexity and the challenges faced by setting up open geospatial data services into an operational environment. Achieved all its agreements. The documents, as I say, are available on Open ELS. Please take the trouble to look at that if you're interested. The third project, Core Reference Dataset. This was a response to proposals by European Environment Agency to take the Korean land cover data set and expand it, increase its availability, and in particular to create a vector data set, what's called the backbone, if you will. And we wanted to try to demonstrate how we could meet that demand for the European Union's Agency for the Environment, but also being mindful that there was a broader need for such a data set. And again, you're going to hear a little bit about the experiences we had in doing that. We necessarily started with some priority data themes, hydrography and transport, but have the ambition, and still do, to add other themes later, such as addresses, elevation, orthophotos. We did start with the Inspire dataset, but it was a simplified data model, and that was necessary to take some of the complexity out of it. And prototype datasets were created for evaluation. And now again, we're at that same problem of funding. How do we sustain this going forward? We have a concept. I think we have a prototype. Yes, there are issues with it, but actually to continue to do this and make it available, who's going to pay for this? Interestingly enough, we very quickly, within 9 months, got 18 of our members signed up to provide data for that core reference data set. There was only one country that was not able to provide that and commit to it at that stage. But we had this commitment to go further with that core reference data set. Again, of course, subject to the funding being available. So I'm going to stop there. I'll come back in a moment, and I'm going to hand over to Eva, who's going to talk firstly from a data provider perspective.
Thank you. So thanks for the invitation to share the experience of one of the national mapping agencies from this long distance run for the European spatial data infrastructure. Experiences, it means a lot of memories and lessons learned. And I had a shared role. I worked for the National Association for GI, then for the Commission for 5 years, and then I returned 10 years ago to work for the National Mapping and Surveying and Cadastre Agency called CHUSAC, and there I was responsible for coordinating the implementation of Inspire. So it was a tough role, and I earned what I was contributing to plan before. So tough it was. So a lot of memories, because that was to provide national services, was it first to build them, and some of the lessons for building, planning those national services then repeat in that what's happening at the European level, but a step or dimension forward. The National Mapping Agency in Czech Republic is responsible for both the topographic based data and products, and also the administrative data, location data, which are partially in the cadastre, and as a big source of information for the base registries and e-government in the Czech Republic. It joined in the so-called RUJAN, base registry for territorial identification addresses and real estates. So in addition to that, what's there given, it's the administrative units, buildings, parcels, and that what's a part of everyday decision by many of e-government agendas or even banks, etc. And having this exercise, and on the other hand, the Inspire both started in 2010, we had to focus very much on a combination of only one principle application, and then for the publishing in broad to as many users as possible in this part of field. Czech office is a member of Geographic, so we had the pleasure and could cope with our colleagues and exchange experiences in different products preparation and European projects. It's mentioned the European Location Framework, Open ELS. We were not member of it, but contributed with our data there, and also took part in some of the testings. And one of the interesting experiences I will remain then was our collaboration with Polish colleagues at the Crossborder domain. So, as I mentioned, two types of products, information system for cadastre and the base registry, and then the fundamental base of geographic data. And I highlighted because these have different sorts of data maintenance, data provision, and licensing. And then in the applying of implementing rules, and also in the contribution into the projects, we had to face different approaches and try to find solutions. And the GeoPortal was an important tool to help us and hopefully the users as well. And as I mentioned, the Open One principle is for both the e-government and Inspire. And because for the base registry, there are thousands of organizations of the local and regional authorities involved in the editing, and numbers of people caring for the everyday data to be valid, legally valid, up to date. We were very much interested in the task that the output from this source would be useful in a similar quality also at the European infrastructure for spatial information. So it was our ambition to find a way how to go through and not to erodate the content which is from the base registry. And it was challenging. So they are due to the two types of data sources. There are two ways of accessing the Inspire implementation, the topographic products or the classical surveying products go through the ETL tools and are updated in monthly, half-year periods and published to the GeoPortal as data sets. The base registry content lives and also needs to be published in the online regime with specific rules for that. And on the other hand, the base registry content, which does not contain personal information, is published as much as possible for reuse. So it was easier, although this online regime was more challenging. So then you see the list of themes we have implemented as the agency and who is or authority, and more details are visible on the GeoPortal, and it's published as the main source and harvested to the national GeoPortal, or as it was in the ELF project, to the services which were provided through the platform of the project. So 2 years ago there was the first decade of Inspire implementation, and we prepared an overview for that. And on the top line you can see the years of implementation. At the beginning, the organization and legal parts, then the renewal of the GeoPortal and different services, and then step by step the different harmonized data sets and their services. And you see it was not a continuous evolution, it was in steps, and nowadays all of them are running as needed. The approaches are in thousands, so some of them have several millions of users, but naturally number of our other web services is of much higher usage as those for the cadastre or for the base registry. So, going through the implementation process, we had to focus on quality and interoperability, and the lessons learned were it's a never-ending story due to many changes. And also what we found as important, and independently whether it was in the direction to the Commission or to the OGC or to the ELF project administrators, the communication between the two partners, the provider and the provider of the specification and of the testing tools, is a joint need, because without each other the result becomes poor. So in planning of any of such steps, always the capacity for backing the hotline or support of the providers is very much needed and useful. So not just to see the description of data sets, it is how the data look like. And as the Inspire implementation was followed or underpinned by the ELF participation, there are also two samples of the maps produced for ELF. And here I turn attention to that what we called the cadastral index map, which was very useful or needed from our perspective as the provider of this administrative location data. So I mentioned the cooperation with the Polish colleagues. These are images from the very beginning. At first, those at the beginning were very diverse. This is already the improved part where we find the same visualization and received a seamless product at the border. What was a work of a few weeks for sure, maybe months. And this is what we found as a success. We came into the situation that the content which is legally valid, up to date at the national site, at the very local level, was accessed to that what the international colleagues could see. So our ambition from the beginning, that comes from the e-government, and it is there to be also part of the European infrastructure. So in the prototype, we managed, but naturally we were aware that the infrastructure for the prototype was rather poor to be able to run something like that in the big or large amount. And when we were planning the project, our ambition, as I mentioned, was to have that, what was the symbol for the Czech e-government, the e-gon, to have that contribution going through to be reachable from the European infrastructure and useful for the public administrations elsewhere and other users elsewhere. But where we came through the process of the project, the different steps, in fact, the project received only this level because we discovered that the cross-border harmonization becomes much more difficult than we could imagine, because it's not the topographic harmonization. It's something what needs to be interconnected with the data for e-government, must be able to be resistant in different administrative cases regarding real units, and so that we had to focus on it. And here we started a process in Czech Republic with Polish colleagues on the harmonization of data in the cross regions. And so these three images are just on the harmonization of the data model. What we thought it's a big success to have it, but the further steps were needed or are needed to reach data harmonized from the technical and legal point of view and process point of view to be really compatible with the administrative data. So it's a challenge. Nowadays we are going through this process with all other neighboring countries. And to give some lessons, as was clear, the harmonization of data wasn't just a technical exercise. It's very much a legal exercise with broader network of players. The Ministry of Interior, then the legal agreements must be signed by Parliament, etc. So it becomes much more robust than we could imagine. So there is a difference between the types or their sources of data for national use and for the Inspire use. So it's to touch the complex databases at a national level and to find the appropriate path to turn into the Inspire data sets, and to have a balanced maintenance for both, because both require their staff and capacities. The temporal and legal quality of this administrative location data is very important for a number of e-government decisions. And in the Inspire process, it seemed to us that this value or need was forgotten. So we try and we're trying to explain that when this quality is lost, it can lead to bad decisions. So it's not about all data, but some part and some types of data require much more change management. It means also as regards services. And as I mentioned already, the boundary issues must be faced. Looking backwards, Inspire provided a number of useful tools, but it also underestimated new issues which were discovered through the project, and it is sure that reaching the seamless data is something what still needs a lot of efforts for future. And new stakeholders must be involved. And what we found as well, that it's a difference to run something in a prototype infrastructure and to rely on or to use said infrastructure to be able to run much more large and secure products. As was mentioned, Eurogeographics was an important player, and we used the opportunity of coping very much and appreciate it. But we learned together that neither Geographics or the individual members are able to support this infrastructure which would be needed for a sustainable, stable run of an infrastructure for pan-European services. That this is something what must be solved and debated further. And here I come back into the issue of authoritative data which are needed for some decisions, and we find that from the perspective of the Commission, this is sometimes underestimated, that data which are outdated or not following the specific rules for some types of addresses, administrative units, etc., are taken from other sources which do not have the relevance which is required strictly by the national level. And this could undermine the subsidiarity principles, we are afraid. So this is in fact summary what was mentioned before. I thank you for your attention, and when we have sometimes the thoughts that it's too difficult, just remember the brain can be trained step by step, and it helps us to solve challenging situations. As there in the 17th century, 18th century, there were so many scales at the maps, and the people managed so inspire something what must be manageable as well.